Thinking of moving to Australia in 2025? You might want to think again. From everyday goods that are shockingly pricey to really outdated travel infrastructure, there are many hidden hurdles to Aussie life that, quite frankly, I don't see social media or any travel creators talking about. Did you know that a train fare between major cities can cost more than a flight here and be 10 times longer? Hey, I'm Lottie, a half-Brit, half-Aussie who moved to Sydney last year, and after experiencing these negatives firsthand, I'm breaking down 5 unexpected downsides to Aussie life. And stick around for number 4 because it might change your travel plans entirely. Let's start with biosecurity. You think biosecurity and you think of fruit and vegetables, right? Wrong. Last year, over 393,000 items were seized at Aussie airports, including wooden craft, seeds, and even homemade snacks.
Have you touched any drugs?
I don't understand.
Any heroin, cocaine?
Cocaine?
Yeah, have you been in touch with
Oh,
anything?
no.
When I arrived here last year, upon exiting the airplane, I suddenly realised that I had a pair of wooden chopsticks that I had chucked in last minute in my suitcase back in the UK. I started freaking out when we got to the customs bit. Like, no joke, I was fully sweating bullets about having to declare these chopsticks. It was actually fine in the end. We got to customs and I had to tell them that I had an organic wooden item on me which needs inspecting. You might think this is a bit of an overreaction, but if you've been on an Australian plane landing in Australia, then you'll know that the biosecurity and customs video that they play on the plane upon landing is no joke.
Don't be sorry, just declare it.
Just declare it. When you fill out this card, if you have something to declare, no excuse is good enough.
Australia's tough stance on biosecurity stems from their Biosecurity Act of 2015, which aims at protecting local agriculture and wildlife from invading species. And the Border Force is really strict on organic goods, as these are what often can contain other organic plant matter or animals. And they'll often want to inspect organic goods to avoid situations like this happening. Here are 3 tips you need to hear first before you start packing your bags. Number 1, declare everything that they ask you to declare. It's better than getting fined if they find it accidentally. And if you're shipping your stuff like I did, then you'll need to fill out a lot of forms which meticulously list exactly how many different organic items you have, such as those that contain even duck feathers like duvets or pillows. Even that warm coat you have might contain duck feathers, woolen blankets, and then leather shoes, leather bags. All of that stuff has to be declared if it's in your suitcase or declared on the forms when you're shipping stuff over. Number 2, budget for shipping fees. Last week we finally got our bill through for the 23 boxes or so that my partner and I had shipped over, and for those the total was $250 just for the inspection fees alone. And number 3, plan your move carefully. Gain the correct paperwork for customs and moving stuff if you're shipping things can be really time consuming to complete. So make sure you plan enough time to get it done. What a lot of people don't know is if you're shipping things, on the paperwork that you fill out, you have to declare all the items you also purchased in the last 12 months, as these can be subjected to additional tax. So if you're planning on moving in the next year or so, make sure just to keep a list of the items you're buying, so then you can put them on easily without having to really rack your brains hard and think of every single item off the top of your head that you bought in the last 12 months, because that's what we had to do. The Australian Border Force website includes some really useful information on all the different items that you have to declare, whether you can bring them simply or not. So if you're planning on moving here, I really highly recommend checking out the website to know exactly what things you're better off leaving and which things will be fine to bring in your suitcase. Number 2, weather extremes beyond heat. Yes, it's hot in Australia. This is what everyone tells you. But did you know that it's also really unexpectedly unpredictable? And for some reason, growing up, This crazy Australian weather, I feel, is never shown on Aussie TV shows, at least those broadcasted in the UK. In one day, it can hit 40 degrees and then have storms that flood the streets. In fact, I had this exact thing happen earlier in the week in Sydney, which was crazy.
Sydney has faced a day of weather extremes, some suburbs recording their hottest day in over a year, before a southerly buster brought with it hail and flooding rain.
What I don't hear a lot of people discussing is the wetter weather that Australia has. Coastal humidity can be really intense. Cyclones hit Queensland and the Northern Territory, and flash floods are actually way more common than you think. If you're used to fairly moderate seasons, brace yourself for some crazy weather mood swings. Despite the weather here not maybe 100% being what was sold to me, I actually now think it's kind of fun and part of Australia's unique charm. At least I'm in an area that is not at a flood risk, so fun in that sense, but obviously not fun if you are in areas which are subjected to flooding. If you're coming, think twice before you chuck out your wet raincoats, your umbrella, your wellies, because sometimes you need all of these within 1 week. Although on second thoughts, actually umbrellas don't really do a lot here. At least in Sydney when it gets super stormy and windy, so maybe you don't need one after all. El Nino and El Nina cycles are known for flipping the weather, so generally just keep an eye on the forecast if you're here. And on a darker note, this wild weather may be a larger indication of climate change happening here in Australia. Is it just coincidence that Queensland has announced its latest monsoon season in 70 years? I don't think so. And if you're thinking of visiting Australia for a shorter period, make sure to check the weather forecast for the certain area that you're going and the time of year, as each state in Australia has its own climate, so it really depends on where you're going. Number 3, environmental policies and furniture disposal woes. Thinking of just moving here for a year or two? Wait until you try to get rid of that bulky old mattress. You can't just leave it on the street. Australia fines heavily for illegal dumping, and unfortunately, council pickups are quite limited, even in the cities. Some only allow one small pickup a week, while the local tip charges sky-high prices. Plus, charities won't accept worn-out furniture either. So how do you get rid of this furniture without paying a fortune in tipping fees? Number 1, plan ahead. It may sound obvious, but I know firsthand how hectic moving can be, and sometimes you just don't have as much time as you think you actually need to clear out a whole flat or house. It can take a lot of time and work. Arrange your council pickups weeks in advance, and if you're hitting the maximum of what you can give them each week, you'll need to book pickups for multiple weeks in a row, as many as it takes to get rid of all of your stuff. Each city council has different limitations on how much they can pick up in one go, so check what your local one says. Another good way is to get rid of your items secondhand. It's pretty common here to use Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree, however, make sure you leave enough time for time wasters. Yeah, we all know what people on Facebook Marketplace can be like.
Washing machine for sale, $130. Hi, is this still available? Sure is, Chief.
There's also a lot of these secondhand furniture buy nothing groups. I think pretty much each city has one, which would be really good for buying and selling furniture on. And third, if you're here on a temporary visa or a shorter stay one, you may want to consider finding a place to rent that includes the furniture, so you're not having to buy some. However, these can be pretty competitive to find and get, and you definitely won't be paying cheap prices for them in the cities. So if this is the case, you may want to factor more into your renting budget. Number 4, the tyranny of distance. Sydney to Melbourne by train, a relaxing, cheaper alternative to flying. Right?
Wrong.
Sadly, I discovered this harsh reality when I was looking into how much it would cost me to go from Sydney to Melbourne, with the prospect of my sister potentially coming out here and moving to Melbourne, and I was shocked. The journey can take more than 10 hours, which has hardly improved on the time that it took back in the 60s, and yet can cost the same or more as a flight? Like, how can this be? So sadly, Australia has no bullet train like Japan or fast trains like Europe. As it turns out, when you combine a really large country the size of Europe with a really low population density, that equals really poor train networks. Plus, it's estimated that building one would cost over $100 billion, so the old train network is here to stay.
Trying the Sydney to Melbourne train so you don't have to. We took the day train on the way there, so we had to get up at the crack of dawn. Is it cheap? No. It's $84 for the pleasure of being trapped in this box for 11 hours.
As a result, in Australia, you simply rely heavily on flights, or you have to, which is great for speed, but really not great for our carbon emissions. And until Australia invests in a high-speed rail, expect your carbon footprint to grow well here, particularly if you plan to zip between major cities. It's no wonder that the Sydney to Melbourne flight is the 4th busiest domestic flight route in the world. But this hopefully won't be the case for long, as the Oz government is currently looking into a high-speed rail, starting with connecting Sydney to Newcastle. And lastly, number 5, why books and other items can feel expensive here. So this one's in particular for my UK friends across the pond. Have you ever walked into a bookstore in Australia expecting to see a familiar price tag on the books, but instead finding a price that's expectedly higher?
Why are books so expensive in bookstores? Now that is a question I receive on a daily basis as a bookseller in Australia.
Welcome to the Australian Goods and Service Tax. So unlike the UK or even Europe where books are tax-free, Australia slaps 10% GST on most items, even ebooks. With more international students than ever coming to Australia to study, I think it's something to definitely be aware of that I don't see a lot of people talking about. Because you're paying 10% more on books here, this can definitely add more to your yearly cost here as a student. According to research by the James Cook University, first-year students in Australia spent a combined $2 million Australian dollars in 2023 on textbooks. But before you panic, there are a couple of ways, if you want to come here to study, that you can lower your costs when it comes to buying books. Number 1, check your second-hand stores and libraries. In Australia, particularly in the cities, there are quite a few second-hand bookshops, online and in person, which give you the chance to find pre-loved books at a fraction of the price. I have a bunch in Newtown, for example, where I live, which I love to browse. And secondly, although ebooks are also taxed in Australia, they can be a cheaper alternative to buying real books.
So I saw a video of someone saying that if you read books on a Kindle, it's not the same as reading an actual book, but the video that they were responding to was an Australian reading a book on a Kindle. Let me just say, you have no fucking right to speak on Australians reading books on Kindles. You have no idea how expensive physical books are in Australia.
So that's it. 5 downsides that could potentially make or break your Aussie adventure. If you'd like a more balanced take on life here in Australia, I'd recommend next you watch my 5 unexpected benefits of moving to Australia in 2025. And don't forget to subscribe for more insider tips on Australian life. Thank you so much for watching. All of the statistics and facts I quoted in this video will be linked in the description. Bye for now.